11:11 in the morning, and I thought to myself that I might just do this reading session sharing this, which is the Tibetan book of living and dying, Sogye Rinpoche, a spiritual classic and international bestseller. So and I wanted to get on the chapter titled In the Name, no, wait, where is it? In the Mirror of Death. It's gonna be, 10 pages, something like this. My own very first experience of death came when I was about 7. We were preparing to leave the Eastern Highlands to travel to central Tibet. Samten, one of the personal attendants of my master, was a wonderful monk who was kind to me during my childhood. He had a bright, round, chubby face, always ready to break into a smile. He was everyone's favorite in the monastery because he was so good-natured. Every day my master would give teachings and initiations and lead practices and rituals. Toward the end of the day, I would gather together my friends and act out a little theatrical performance, reenacting the morning's events. It was Samten who would always lend me to the costumes my master had worn in the morning. He never refused me. Suddenly Samten fell ill, and it was clear he was not going to live. We had to postpone our departure. I will never forget the 2 weeks that followed. The rank smell of death hung like a cloud over everything, and whenever I think of that time, that smell comes back to me. The monastery was saturated with an intense awareness of death. This was not all. This was not at all morbid or frightening. However, in the presence of my master, Samten's death took on a special significance. It became a teaching for us all. Samten lay on a bed by the window in a small temple in my master's residence. I knew he was dying. From time to time I would go in and sit by him. He would not talk, and I was shocked by the change in his face, which was now so haggard and drawn. I realized that he was going to leave us and we would never see him again. I felt intensely sad and lonely. Samten's death was not an easy one. The sound of his labored breathing followed us everywhere, and we could smell his body decaying. The monastery was overwhelmingly silent except for his breathing. Everything focused on Samten. Yet, although there was so much suffering in Samten's prolonged dying, we could all see that deep down he had a peace and inner confidence about him. At first I could not explain this, but then I realized what it came from. His faith and his training and the presence of our master. And though I felt sad, I knew then that if our master was there, everything would turn out all right, because he would be able to help Samten toward liberation. Later I came to know that it is the dream of any practitioner to die before his master and have the good fortune to be guided by him through death. As Jamyang Khyentse guided Samten calmly through his dying, he introduced him to all the stages of the process he was going through, one by one. I was astonished by the precision of my master's knowledge and by his confidence and peace. When my master was there, his peaceful confidence would reassure even the most anxious person. Now Jamyang Khyentse was revealing to us his fearlessness of death. Not that he ever treated death lightly. He often told us that he was afraid of it and warned us against taking it naively or complacently. Yet what was it that allowed my master to face death in a way that was at once so sober and so light-hearted, so practical yet so mysteriously carefree? That question fascinated and absorbed me. Samten's death shook me. At the age of 7, I had my first glimpse of the vast power of the tradition I was being made part of, and I began to understand the purpose of spiritual practice. Practice had given Samten an acceptance of death, as well as a clear understanding that suffering and pain can be part of a deep natural process of purification. Practice had given my master a complete knowledge of what death is, and a precise technology for guiding individuals through it. After Samten died, we set off for Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, a tortuous 3-month journey on horseback. From there we continued our pilgrimage to the sacred sites of central and southern Tibet. These are the holy places of the saints, kings, and scholars who brought Buddhism to Tibet from the 7th century onward. My master was the emanation of many masters of all traditions, and because of his reputation he was given a tumultuous reception everywhere we went. For me, that journey was extremely exciting and has remained full of beautiful memories. Tibetans rise early in order to make use of all the natural light. We would go to bed at dusk and rise before daybreak. And by first light, the yaks carrying the baggage would be moving out. The tents would be struck, and the last ones to come down were the kitchen and my master's tent. A scout would go ahead to choose a good camping place, and we would stop and camp around noon for the rest of the day. I used to love to camp by a river and listen to the sound of the water, or to sit in the tent and hear the rain pattering on the roof. We were a small party with about 30 tents in all. During the day I rode on a golden-colored horse next to my master. While we rode, he gave teachings, told stories, practiced, and composed a number of practices especially for me. One day, as we drew near the sacred lake of Yamdrokso and caught sight of the turquoise radiance of its waters, another lama in our party, Lama Tsetin, began to die. The death of Lama Tsetin proved another strong teaching for me. He was a tutor to my master's spiritual wife, Khandro Tsering Shodron, who is still alive today. She is regarded by many as Tibet's foremost woman practitioner, a hidden master who for me is an embodiment of devotion, teaching through the simplicity of her loving presence. Lama Tsetin was an immensely human and grandfatherly character. He was over 60, quite tall and with grey hair, and exuded an effortless gentleness. He was also a highly accomplished practitioner of meditation, and just to be near him used to give me a sense of peace and serenity. Sometimes he would scold me, and I would be afraid of him, but for all his occasional sternness, he never lost his warmth. Lama Tsetin died in an extraordinary way. Although there was a monastery close by, he refused to go there, saying he did not want to leave a corpse for them to clear up. So we camped and pitched our tents in a circle as usual. Khandro was nursing and caring for Lama Tsetin as he was her tutor. She and I were the only 2 people in his tent, when he suddenly called her over. He had an endearing way of calling her me, meaning my child, in his local dialect. Me, he said tenderly, come here. It's happening now. I've no further advice for you. You're fine as you are. I'm happy with you. Serve your master just as you have been doing. Immediately she turned to run out of the tent, but he caught her by the sleeve. Where are you going? He asked. I'm going to call Rinpoche, she replied. Don't bother him, there's no need, he smiled. With the master there's no such thing as distance. With that, he just gazed up into the sky and passed away. Kandra released herself from his grip and rushed out to call my master. I sat there unable to move. I was amazed that anyone who was staring into the face of death could have that kind of confidence. Lama Tsetan could have had his Lama there in person to help him, something anyone else would have longed for, but he had no need. I understand why now. He had already realized the presence of the master within himself. Jamyang Khyentse was there with him always. In his mind and heart, never for one moment did he feel any separation. Kandra did go to fetch Jamyang Khyentse. I shall never forget how he stooped to enter the tent. He gave one look at Lama Tsetsen's face and then, peering into his eyes, began to chuckle. He always used to call him La Gang, old Lama. It was a sign of his affection. La Gen, he said, don't stay in that state. He could see, I now understand, that Lama Tsetan was doing one particular practice of meditation in which the practitioner merges the nature of his mind with the space of truth and can remain in that state for many days as he dies. Again, we are travelers. We're pilgrims. We don't have the time to wait that long. Come on, I'll guide you. Transfixed, I watched what happened next, and if I hadn't seen it myself, I would never have believed it. Lama Tsetan came back to life. Then my master sat by his side and took him through the pova, the practice for guiding the consciousness at the moment before death. There are many ways of doing this practice, and the one he used then culminated with the master uttering the syllable "ah" 3 times. As my master declared the first "ah," he would hear Lama Tsetan accompanying him quite audibly. The second time his voice was less distinct, and the third time it was silent. He had gone. The death of Samten taught me the purpose of spiritual practice. Lama Tsetan's death taught me that it is not unusual for practitioners of his caliber to conceal their remarkable qualities during their lifetime. Sometimes, in fact, they show them only once at the moment of death. I understand, even as a child, that there was a striking difference between the death of Samten and that of Lama Tsetan. And I realized that it was the difference between the death of a good monk who had practiced in his life and that of a much more realized practitioner. Samten died in an ordinary way and in pain, yet with the confidence of faith. Lama Tsetan's death was a display of spiritual mastery. Soon after Lama Tsetan's funeral, we moved up into the monastery of Yamjok. As usual, I slept next to my master in his room, and I remember that night watching the shadows of the butter lamps flickering on the wall. While everyone else slept soundly, I lay awake and cried the whole night long. I understood that night that death is real, and that I too would have to die. As I lay there thinking about death and about my own death, through all my sadness of a profound sense of acceptance began slowly to emerge, and with it a resolve to dedicate my life to spiritual practice. So I began to face death and its implications very young. I could never have imagined then how many kinds of deaths there were to follow, one heaped up upon another. The death that was the tragic loss of my country, Tibet, after the Chinese occupation. The death that is exile, the death of losing everything my family and I possessed. My family, Lakar Tsang, had been among the wealthiest in Tibet. Since the 14th century, it had been famous as one of the most important benefactors of Buddhism, supporting the teaching of Buddha and helping the great masters with their work. The most shattering death of all was yet to come, that of my master, Jamyang Khyentse. Losing him, I felt I had lost the ground of my existence. It was in 1959, the year of the fall of Tibet. For the Tibetans, my master's death was a second devastation blow, and for Tibet it marked the end of an era. Death in the modern world. When I first came to the West, I was shocked by the contrast between the attitudes to death I had been brought up with and those I now found. For all its technological achievements, modern Western society has no real understanding of death or what happens in death or after death. I learned that people today are taught to deny death and taught that it means nothing but annihilation and loss. That means that most of the world lives either in denial of death or in terror of it. Even talking about death is considered morbid, and many people believe that simply mentioning death is to risk wishing it upon ourselves. Others look on death with a naive, thoughtless cheerfulness, thinking that for some unknown reason death will work out all right for them, and that it is nothing to worry about. When I think of them, I am reminded of what one Tibetan master says. People often make the mistake of being frivolous about death and think, oh well, death happens to everybody. It's not a big deal. It's natural. I'll be fine. That's a nice theory until one is dying. Of these two attitudes towards death, one views death as something to scurry away from, and the other as something that will just take care of itself. How far they both are from understanding death's true significance. All the greatest spiritual traditions of the world, including, of course, Christianity, have told us clearly that death is not the end. They have all handed down the vision of some sort of life to come, which infuses this life that we are leading now with sacred meaning. But despite their teachings, modern society is largely a spiritual desert where the majority imagine that this life is all that there is, without any real or authentic faith in an afterlife. Most people live lives deprived of any ultimate meaning. I have come to realize that the disastrous effects of the denial of death go far beyond the individual. They affect the whole planet. Believing fundamentally that this life is the only one, modern people have developed no long-term vision, so there is nothing to restrain them from plundering the planet for their own immediate ends, and from living in a selfish way that could prove fatal for the future. How many more warnings do we need? Like this one from the former Brazilian Minister for the Environment, responsible for the Amazon rainforest. Modern industrial society is a fanatical religion. We are demolishing, poisoning, destroying all life systems on the planet. We are signing IOUs our children will not be able to pay. We are acting as if we were the last generation on the planet without a radical change in heart, in mind, in vision. The earth will end up like Venus. shared in death. Fear of death and ignorance of the afterlife are fueling the destruction of our environment that is threatening all of our lives. So isn't it all the more disturbing that people are not taught what death is or how to die? Or given any hope in what lies after death? And so what really lies behind life? Could it be more ironic that young people are so highly educated in every subject except the one that holds the key to the entire meaning of life and perhaps to our very survival? It has often intrigued me how some Buddhist master I know ask one simple question of people who approach them for teaching. Do you believe in a life after this one? They are not being asked whether they believe in it as a philosophical proposition, but whether they feel it deeply in their heart. The master knows that if people believe in a life after this one, their whole outlook on life will be different, and they will have a distinct sense of personal responsibility and morality. What the masters must suspect is that there is a danger that people who have no strong belief in a life after this one will create a society fixated on short-term results without much thought for the consequences of their actions. Could this be the major reason why we have created a brutal world like the one in which we are now living, a world with little real compassion? Sometimes I think that the most affluent and powerful countries of the developed world are like the realm of the gods described in the Buddhist teachings. The gods are said to live lives of fabulous luxury, reveling in every conceivable pleasure, without a thought for the spiritual dimension of life. All seems to go well until death draws near and unexpected signs of decay appear. Then the gods' wives and lovers no longer dare approach them, but throw flowers to them from a distance, with casual prayers that they be reborn again as gods. None of the memories of happiness or comfort can shelter them now from the suffering they face. They only make it more savage. So the dying gods are left to die alone in misery. The fate of the gods reminds me of the way the elderly, the sick, and the dying are treated today. Our society is obsessed with youth, sex, and power, and we shun old age and decay. Isn't it terrifying that we discard old people when their working life is finished and they are no longer useful? Isn't it disturbing that we cast them into old people's homes, where they die lonely and abandoned? Isn't it time also that we took another look at how we sometimes treat those suffering with terminal illness, like cancer and AIDS? I know a number of people who have died from AIDS, and I have seen how often they were treated as outcasts, even by their friends, and how the stigma attached to the disease reduced them to despair and made them feel their life was disgusting and had, in the eyes of the world, already ended. Even when a person we know or love is dying, so often people find they are giving almost no idea of how to help them, and when they are dead, we are not encouraged to give any thought to the future of the dead person, how he or she will continue, or how we could go on helping him or her. In fact, any attempt to think along these lines risks being dismissed as nonsensical and ridiculous. What all of this is showing us with painful clarity is that now more than ever before we need a fundamental change in our attitude toward death and dying. Happily, attitudes are beginning to change. The hospice movement, for example, is doing marvelous work in giving practical and emotional care. Yet practical and emotional care are not enough. People who are dying need love and care, but they also need something even more profound. They need to discover a real meaning to death and to life. Without that, how can we give them ultimate comfort, helping the dying then must include the possibility of spiritual care, because it is only with spiritual knowledge that we can truly face and understand death. I have been heartened by the way in which in recent years the whole subject of death and dying has been opened up in the West by pioneers such as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and Raymond Moody. Looking deeply into the way that we care for the dying, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has shown that with unconditional love and a more enlightened attitude, dying can be a peaceful, even transformative experience. The scientific studies of the many different aspects of the near-death experience that followed the brave work of Raymond Moody have held out to humanity a vivid and strong hope that life does not end with death, and there is indeed a life after life. Some, unfortunately, did not really understand the full meaning of these revelations about death and dying. They went to the extreme of glamorizing death, and I have heard of tragic cases of young people who committed suicide because they believed death was beautiful and an escape from the depression of their lives. But whether we fear death and refuse to face it, or whether we romanticize it, death is trivialized. Both despair and euphoria about death are an evasion. Death is neither depressing nor exciting. It is simply a fact of life. How sad it is that most of us only begin to appreciate our life when we are on the point of dying. I often think of the words of the great Buddhist master Padmasambhava: those who believe they have plenty of time get ready only at the time of death. Then they are ravaged by regret. But isn't it far too late? What more chilling commentary on the modern world could there be than that most people die unprepared for death, as they have lived, unprepared for life? Okay, there are the notes. Why are they putting it on the edge of the... Should be in every page where the numbers appear, right? Not some random page at the end of the chapter. Okay, so the journey, the journey through life and death, according to the wisdom of Buddha, we can actually use our lives to prepare for death. We do not have to wait for the painful death of someone close to us, or the shock of terminal illness to force us into looking at our lives. Nor are we condemned to go out empty-handed at death to meet the unknown. We can begin here and now to find meaning in our lives. We can make of every moment an opportunity to change and to prepare wholeheartedly, precisely, and with peace of mind for death and eternity. In the Buddhist approach, life and death are seen as one whole, where death is the beginning of another chapter of life. Death is a mirror in which the entire meaning of life is reflected. This view is central to the teachings of the most ancient school of Tibetan Buddhism. Many of you will have heard of the Tibetan Book of Death. What I am seeking to do in this book is to explain it and expand the Tibetan Book of the Dead, to cover not only death, but life as well, and to fill out in detail the whole teaching of which the Tibetan Book of the Dead is only a part. In this wonderful teaching we find the whole of life and death presented together as a series of constantly changing transitional realities known as bardos. The word bardo is commonly used to denote the intermediate state between death and rebirth. But in reality, bardos are occurring continuously throughout both life and death, and are conjunctures when the possibility of liberation or enlightenment is heightened. The bardos are particularly powerful opportunities for liberation because the teachings show us certain moments that are much more powerful than others, and much more charged with potential, when whatever you do has a crucial and far-reaching effect. I think of a bardo as being like a moment when you step toward the edge of a precipice. Such a moment, for example, is when a master introduces a disciple to the essential, original, and innermost nature of his or her mind. The greatest and most cherished of these moments, however, is the moment of death. So from the Tibetan Buddhist point of view, we can divide our entire existence into 4 continuously interlinked realities. 1. Life. 2. Dying and death. 3. After death. And 4. Rebirth. These are known as the 4 bardos. 1. The natural bardo of this life. 2. The painful bardo of dying. 3. The luminous bardo of dharmata. And 4. The karmic bardo of becoming. Because of the vastness and all comprehensiveness of the Bardo teachings, this book has been carefully structured. You will be guided stage by stage through the unfolding vision of the journey through life and death. Our exploration necessarily begins with a direct reflection on what death means and the many facets of the truth of impermanence. The kind of reflection that can enable us to make rich use of this life while we still have time, and ensure that when we die, it will be without remorse or self-recrimination at having wasted our lives. As Tibet's famous poet saint Milarepa said, "My religion is to live and die without regret." Contemplating deeply on the secret message of impermanence, what lies in fact beyond impermanence and death, leads directly to the heart of the ancient and powerful Tibetan teachings. The introduction to the essential nature of mind, realization of the nature of mind, what you could call our innermost essence, the truth we all search for, is the key to understanding life and death. What happens at the moment of death is that the ordinary mind and its delusions die, and in that gap the boundless sky-like nature of our mind is uncovered. This essential nature of mind is the background to the whole of life and death, like the sky, which folds the whole universe in its embrace. Kind of makes me remind of the balloon. The teachings make it clear that if all we know of mind is the aspect of mind that dissolves when we die, we will be left with no idea of what continues, no knowledge of the new dimension of the deeper reality of the nature of mind. So it is vital for us all to familiarize ourselves with the nature of mind while we are still alive. Only then will we be prepared when it reveals itself spontaneously and powerfully at the moment of death. Be able to recognize it as naturally, the teachings say, as a child running into its mother's lap, and by remaining in that state, finally be liberated. A description of the nature of mind leads naturally into a complete instruction on meditation, for meditation is the only way we can repeatedly uncover and gradually realize and stabilize that nature of mind. An explanation will then be given of the nature of human evolution, rebirth, and karma, so as to provide you with the fullest possible meaning and context of our path through life and death. By this point, you will have enough knowledge to be able to enter confidently the heart of the book, a comprehensive account drawn from many different sources of all of the 4 bardos and all of the different stages of death and dying. Instruction, practical advice, and spiritual practices are set out in detail for helping both ourselves and others through life, through dying, through death, and after death. The book then concludes with a vision of how the Bardo teachings can help just had a ringing in my right ear. Can help us understand the deepest nature of the human mind and of the universe. My students often ask me, how do we know that these Bardos are, and from where does the astonishing precision of the Bardo teachings and their uncannily clear knowledge of each stage of dying, death, and rebirth come? The answer may seem initially difficult to understand for many readers, because the notion of mind the West now has is an extremely narrow one. Despite the major breakthroughs of recent years, especially in mind-body science and transpersonal psychology, the great majority of scientists continue to reduce the mind to no more than physical processes in the brain, which goes against the testimony of thousands of years of experience of mystics and meditators of all religions. From what source or authority, then, can a book like this be written? The inner science of Buddhism is based, as one American scholar puts it, on a thorough and comprehensive knowledge of reality, on an already assessed and depth understanding of and environment, a depth understanding of self and environment. That is to say, on the complete enlightenment of the Buddha. The source of the Bardo teachings is the enlightened mind, the completely awake Buddha mind. As experience explained and transmitted by a long line of masters that stretches back to the primordial Buddha, their careful, meticulous, you could almost say scientific explorations and formulations of their discoveries of mind over many centuries have given us the most complete picture possible of both life and death. It is this complete picture that, inspired by Jamyang Khyentse and all my other great masters, I am humbly attempting to transmit for the very first time to the West. Over many years of contemplation and teaching and practice and clarifying questions with my masters, I have written the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying as a quintessential of the hot advice of all my masters to be a new Tibetan Book of the Dead and a Tibetan Book of Life. And I wanted to be a manual, a guide, a work of reference, and a source of sacred inspiration. Only by going over this book and reading it again and again, I suggest, can its many layers of meaning be revealed. The more you use it, you will find, the more profoundly you will feel its implications, and the more you will come to realize the depth of the wisdom that is being transmitted to you through the teachings. The Bardo teachings show us precisely what will happen if we prepare for death, and what will happen if we do not. The choice could not be clearer. If we refuse to accept death now, while we are still alive, we will pay dearly throughout our lives, at the moment of death and thereafter. The effects of this refusal will ravage this life and all the lives to come. We will not be able to live our lives fully. We will remain imprisoned in the very aspect of ourselves that has to die. This ignorance will rob us of the basis of the journey to enlightenment and trap us endlessly in the realm of illusion, the uncontrolled cycle of birth and death, that ocean of suffering that we Buddhists call samsara. Yet the fundamental message of the Buddhist teachings is that if we are prepared, there is tremendous hope, both in life and in death. The teachings reveal to us the possibility of an astounding and finally boundless freedom, which is ours to work for now, in life. The freedom that will also enable us to choose our death and so to choose our birth. For someone who has prepared and practiced death comes not as a defeat but as a triumph, the crowning and most glorious moment of life. Okay. This is where this is the first chapter.